announcing today a major show of military force in the region.
Night over the Caribbean. No moon. No lights beyond the faint glow of instrument panels and the distant shimmer of a carrier's wake cutting through black water. Somewhere in that darkness, one of the most advanced warships ever built moves with deliberate calm. The USS Gerald R. Ford. Around her, destroyers carve wide defensive arcs, helicopters hover low with dipping sonar, and every screen in every combat information center glows with quiet tension. Because tonight, the ocean is not empty. At 2:17 local time, a sonar operator aboard an escorting destroyer reports a transient contact. Faint, intermittent, too deliberate to be random noise. The acoustic signature does not match commercial traffic. It does not match marine life. It does not match anything logged in the previous 48 hours of patrol. Within minutes, the carrier strike group shifts posture. Course adjustments are subtle, almost invisible to the untrained eye, but they tighten the defensive ring around the Ford. Helicopters are launched without fanfare. No public announcements. No press releases. Just procedure. Intelligence briefings in the days prior had warned of unusual naval activity linked to Venezuela. Satellite imagery had shown movements at a submarine facility. Signals intercepts hinted at an extended patrol beyond routine coastal exercises. Officially, nothing was declared. Unofficially, commanders were told to expect a test. Not an attack, but a probe. A demonstration. A message. Beneath the surface, a diesel-electric submarine operates in near silence, relying on battery power to minimize its acoustic footprint. It slips below a thermal layer, using the ocean's temperature gradients as cover. It changes speed in short, calculated bursts. At one point, it vanishes from passive sonar entirely. Then it reappears, closer. On the carrier, flight deck operations continue, but with reduced lighting. Radar sweeps intensify. Anti-submarine warfare teams deploy a lattice of sonar buoys, creating an invisible net across miles of open water. Each buoy listens. Each data stream feeds into a rapidly evolving tactical picture. The contact sharpens. A probable classification emerges. Not a whale, not debris, a submarine. What happens next is not recorded in any public log. There are no confirmed statements. But according to sources familiar with the operation, the distance between hunter and hunted closed to within what naval doctrine considers a critical envelope. At that range, a targeting solution could theoretically be calculated. At that range, intent matters more than firepower. Did the submarine simulate a torpedo lock? Did the strike group deliberately expose itself to measure the adversary's capability? Or was this an elaborate game of brinkmanship, each side testing the other's resolve without crossing the line into open conflict? Within hours, the contact faded. The submarine withdrew toward territorial waters. The carrier strike group maintained formation and continued its patrol. No shots fired, no official incident. Yet analysts later noted subtle changes in regional deployments, increased patrol frequencies, and accelerated training cycles. Was this a routine encounter, or a quiet rehearsal for something far more serious? In the shadows beneath the Caribbean, a silent contest unfolded. One that reveals how modern naval power is projected, challenged, and measured without a single missile leaving its tube. Tonight, we reconstruct that encounter step by step, examining the maneuvers, the decisions, and the high-stakes calculus that defined a battle no one admits ever happened. Just after midnight, the Caribbean lay under a ceiling of low clouds that swallowed starlight and blurred the horizon into a seamless band of black. The sea state was moderate, long rolling swells pushing from the east, their crests barely visible in the dim glow of shielded navigation lights. At the center of this controlled movement cut the massive silhouette of the USS Gerald R. Ford, a 100,000-ton nuclear-powered aircraft carrier and the lead ship of her class, designed to project air power across oceans. Even at reduced lighting, her island structure rose like a dark tower above the flight deck, where a limited night cycle had concluded less than an hour earlier. Below decks, reactors hummed steadily, Electromagnetic aircraft launch systems sat idle but ready, and nearly 5,000 sailors and air wing personnel rotated through watches in a choreography refined by decades of carrier operations. The carrier was not alone. Around her, the strike group maintained a layered defensive formation typical for operations in strategically sensitive waters. Guided missile destroyers held outer screening positions, their Aegis combat systems scanning air and surface contacts, while a cruiser operated closer in, managing the broader air defense picture. An attack submarine, its position undisclosed even within much of the group, moved somewhere beneath the formation, providing an additional unseen layer of protection. Overhead, earlier maritime patrol aircraft had swept the region, and an MH-60R Seahawk helicopter remained on alert status, rotors tied down but crew close at hand. Officially, the strike group was conducting routine presence operations in international waters, reinforcing freedom of navigation and reassuring regional partners. Unofficially, intelligence briefings over the previous week had introduced a sharper edge to the deployment. Analysts had noted unusual Venezuelan naval movements along the country's northern coast, including increased logistical activity at submarine facilities near Puerto Cabello. Satellite imagery, while inconclusive, suggested that at least one diesel-electric boat had departed port outside its typical training cycle. Signals intercepts indicated extended communications silence from a hull normally active in coastal patrol patterns. None of this confirmed hostile intent, but it was enough to raise eyebrows in fleet headquarters. Shortly after 200 hours local time, the first subtle anomaly appeared, not on radar, but in the acoustic domain. A destroyer positioned on the western arc of the formation registered a transient low-frequency signature through passive sonar. It was faint, masked intermittently by biologics and merchant traffic noise carried from distant shipping lanes. The initial classification read, possible machinery noise, a category broad enough to include everything from distant tankers to shifting thermal layers. The contact faded within minutes, then reappeared at a slightly different bearing. That inconsistency drew attention. Inside the destroyer's Combat Information Center, operators replayed the acoustic data, isolating blade rates and harmonic patterns. The sound did not match known commercial propeller profiles stored in the database, nor did it correspond to the U.S. submarine assigned to the group, whose acoustic signature was strictly cataloged and deconflicted. A second ship confirmed a marginal trace along a converging bearing line. Still too weak for firm classification, but no longer dismissible. On the Ford herself, word moved quickly but quietly up the chain of command. The carrier adjusted course by a few degrees, a change subtle enough to appear routine to any distant observer, but sufficient to tighten spacing within the defensive screen. Flight operations remained suspended, ostensibly due to weather sealings, though some officers later suggested the pause was a precaution to reduce deck noise and simplify the acoustic picture. The strike group commander ordered an elevated anti-submarine posture without escalating to active sonar, a step that would have signaled overt confrontation. What heightened tension was not a dramatic maneuver, but the pattern. Over the next 30 minutes, the contact behaved with deliberate ambiguity, approaching, pausing, then drifting laterally as if testing detection thresholds. At one point, analysts estimated the source might have dipped below a thermal layer, exploiting temperature gradients to distort sonar returns. That tactic is well documented in submarine doctrine. What made this episode unsettling was the precision. The contact appeared to skirt just beyond what naval planners consider the outer defensive envelope of a carrier. Close enough to observe, far enough to avoid immediate counteraction. By 3 o'clock, the situation had crystallized into something more than routine background noise. No weapons were armed, no alarms sounded across the flight deck, and no public statement would ever mention the encounter. Yet within the dim red lighting of multiple combat centers, professionals understood that the night had shifted from patrol to contest. The ocean around the USS Gerald R. Ford was no longer simply dark. It was occupied. The first real alarm did not come as a blaring siren or shouted command. It came as a quiet change in tone inside the Combat Information Center of one of the escorting destroyers. At 2:17 local time, a sonar supervisor requested a second confirmation on a low-frequency contact that had now persisted across multiple passive arrays. What had begun as a faint acoustic irregularity was stabilizing into something structured. Shaft rotations, intermittent machinery noise, and a rhythm inconsistent with commercial shipping. The contact was still classified as probable submarine, but the confidence level was climbing. The destroyer, equipped with a modern towed array sonar system and hull-mounted sonar, adjusted speed slightly to optimize acoustic conditions. Even minor propulsion changes can sharpen detection ranges by reducing self-noise. The towed array, streaming thousands of feet behind the ship, began to produce a cleaner bearing line. Another escort vessel, positioned several nautical miles away, reported a correlating trace. Triangulation narrowed the potential location to a moving underwater target operating at low speed. Within minutes, the carrier strike group shifted from routine patrol posture to a coordinated anti-submarine warfare response. The process was procedural, almost clinical. No panic. No dramatic announcements over loudspeakers. Instead, secure voice circuits lit up between ships. Data links transmitted acoustic snapshots in near real time. The strike group commander authorized the launch of an MH-60R Seahawk helicopter configured for anti-submarine operations. Its crew had been on alert status since sunset, a standard precaution in regions assessed as moderately contested. On the flight deck of the carrier, red lighting bathed the aircraft as deck crews moved with disciplined urgency. The helicopter's rotors began turning against the humid Caribbean air. Within 7 minutes of the launch order, it lifted off and disappeared into the darkness, guided by coordinates transmitted from the destroyer's sonar team. The MH-60R is equipped with dipping sonar, sonobuoys, and lightweight torpedoes, making it one of the most flexible tools in the Navy's anti-submarine arsenal. That night, it carried a mixed load of passive and active buoys, prepared to create a temporary acoustic barrier in the suspected path of the contact. Back in the destroyer's sonar room, operators debated classification. The acoustic signature suggested a diesel-electric platform running on battery power, indicated by the absence of continuous high-output turbine noise typical of nuclear propulsion. At least one analyst believed the blade count and harmonic pattern loosely matched older German-designed submarines exported in the late 20th century, models similar to those once acquired by the Venezuelan Navy. That assessment was tentative, based on incomplete data and environmental distortion, but it added weight to the suspicion that this was no random interference. At 2:34, the helicopter deployed its first string of passive sonobuoys in a staggered line across the projected track. Each buoy began transmitting acoustic data back to the aircraft, which relayed it to the strike group network. For several tense minutes, the contact faded again, slipping beneath a thermal layer that bent sound waves unpredictably. Oceanographic data collected earlier in the week indicated strong stratification in the upper 200 feet of water, ideal conditions for a submarine attempting to mask its approach. Then, at 2:46, one of the newly deployed buoys registered a sharper return. Not a full acoustic fingerprint, but a detectable transient consistent with a change in propulsion speed. The submarine, if that was indeed what it was, appeared to accelerate briefly before slowing again. Some officers later speculated that this maneuver may have been an intentional probe, testing how quickly the strike group could localize and respond. At this stage, the strike group faced a critical decision point. International waters allowed freedom of movement for all parties. The unidentified contact had not demonstrated overtly hostile behavior. Yet its proximity to a U.S. aircraft carrier, one of the most strategically valuable assets afloat, could not be ignored. The commander authorized limited active sonar pings from one destroyer, a calibrated escalation designed to signal awareness without committing to aggressive action. The sharp acoustic pulses cut through the water column, unmistakable to any submerged crew. Almost immediately after the active transmission, the contact shifted bearing again, increasing lateral movement away from the carrier's core position. Whether that was coincidence or reaction remained unclear. What was certain was that the encounter had transitioned from uncertainty to deliberate interaction. The first signal of alarm had evolved into a controlled contest of detection and evasion, with every movement measured, every transmission analyzed, and every decision balanced between restraint and readiness. Once the initial exchange of detection and signaling had taken place, the encounter shifted into something more deliberate and far more complex. The submarine, already aware that it had been localized within a narrowing grid, altered its behavior in a way that suggested calculated intent rather than panic. Its speed fluctuated in short, measured bursts, likely designed to complicate fire control solutions and distort acoustic tracking. Instead of running directly away from the carrier strike group, it angled obliquely across the formation's projected path, forcing the escorts to reevaluate their geometry. This was no random evasion. It was maneuver warfare conducted in 3 dimensions, invisible to the naked eye, yet unfolding in real time across tactical displays. Anti-submarine warfare doctrine emphasizes containment and control rather than immediate destruction, especially in peacetime encounters. The destroyers began executing a barrier maneuver, spacing themselves to deny the submarine a clean approach vector toward the carrier's center. Each ship adjusted speed independently to optimize sonar performance while maintaining overlapping coverage. Beneath them, the ocean's thermal structure created acoustic blind spots that both sides attempted to exploit. The submarine dipped deeper, likely approaching the lower boundary of the thermocline, where sound refraction can create deceptive echoes and ghost contacts. At least twice, operators briefly lost the track before reacquiring it through cross-correlation between ships. Additional sonobuoys were deployed in expanding arcs, forming what amounted to a temporary underwater fence. Data fusion systems on board the escorts combined buoy transmissions, shipboard sonar returns, and predictive modeling to estimate the submarine's probable course. The emerging picture suggested that the vessel had closed to within a distance naval planners consider tactically sensitive. Close enough, in theory, to calculate a firing solution for heavyweight torpedoes under ideal conditions. Whether the submarine actually achieved such a solution is unknown, but internal assessments later concluded that it had likely entered a simulated engagement envelope. What raised the tension further was a brief acoustic event recorded at 3:12. One buoy detected a sharp, transient sound consistent with the opening and closing of an outer torpedo tube door. The signature was faint and partially masked by background noise, and analysts debated its validity in the hours that followed. It could have been mechanical cavitation from a rapid ballast adjustment. It could have been structural flexing under depth change. Or it could have been a deliberate signal, an unsubtle reminder of capability. The strike group commander was informed within seconds. The response was measured but unmistakable. A second destroyer shifted to a more aggressive posture, activating continuous active sonar sweeps rather than isolated pings. The pulses reverberated through the water column, stripping away much of the submarine's acoustic concealment. Simultaneously, the airborne helicopter repositioned and lowered its dipping sonar closer to the estimated track, narrowing the uncertainty zone. No weapons were armed beyond standard readiness, but targeting data began populating fire control systems as a contingency. Inside the submarine, though no official account exists, one can reasonably infer the pressure mounting. Diesel-electric boats rely on stealth, not speed. Sustained active sonar illumination erodes their primary advantage. Battery reserves are finite, and rapid maneuvering drains them faster. According to post-incident analysis shared anonymously with defense correspondents months later, the submarine's acoustic profile began to reflect increased propulsion strain, suggesting either a sprint to reposition or a controlled withdrawal under less than ideal energy conditions. At 3:27, the underwater chess match reached its critical moment. The submarine's projected path indicated a potential crossing ahead of the carrier's intended course line. Rather than altering the carrier's trajectory dramatically, a move that could signal alarm to external observers, the strike group adjusted the outer screen again, effectively blocking the intercept geometry. The submarine would have to either turn away or risk deeper encirclement. For nearly 6 minutes, acoustic returns showed minimal movement, as if both sides were recalculating. Then came the shift. The submarine altered heading more decisively, increasing lateral distance from the carrier's central position. Its speed rose briefly, then stabilized on a bearing trending toward waters closer to its national coastline. The destroyers maintained contact, but did not pursue aggressively beyond a defined perimeter. The helicopter deployed a final pattern of buoys to ensure the track remained consistent with withdrawal, rather than repositioning for a second approach. Throughout this phase, no torpedoes were launched, no depth charges deployed, no escalation beyond sonar and positioning occurred. Yet the dynamics had all the elements of a live engagement: detection, counter-detection, maneuver, simulated targeting, and strategic signaling. Each side demonstrated capability without crossing the threshold into open hostilities. The submarine had proven it could approach a high-value naval asset under contested conditions. The carrier strike group had demonstrated layered defenses capable of detecting, isolating, and pressuring that approach into retreat. By 3:58, the acoustic signature weakened with distance. Buoys fell silent one by one as their operational windows expired. The destroyers gradually reduced active sonar intensity, returning to passive monitoring. The helicopter, fuel nearing minimum safe margin, recovered aboard the carrier under dim deck lighting. On tactical displays, the once intense cluster of tracking symbols stretched outward and faded toward the edge of sensor range. In the aftermath, the strike group maintained its patrol course, outwardly unchanged. Internally, however, analysts compiled a detailed reconstruction of the encounter. Acoustic data would be studied for weeks, comparing blade rates, transient noises, and maneuver patterns against known submarine classes. Oceanographic conditions were logged to refine future detection models. Training evaluations noted response times from first contact to coordinated barrier formation. Even small timing differences, measured in seconds, were dissected for improvement. For the submarine's crew, the mission likely ended as a qualified success. They had penetrated a layered defense sufficiently to test reaction thresholds and gather intelligence on anti-submarine tactics. For the carrier strike group, the outcome reinforced confidence in multi-ship coordination and airborne ASW integration. Strategically, the episode altered little on the surface. Diplomats issued no statements. Governments acknowledged nothing. Yet in quieter defense circles, the encounter was cited as a case study in modern gray zone naval competition. No missiles flew, no ships were damaged, and no headlines screamed of confrontation. Still, beneath a moonless Caribbean sky, two forces had measured each other with lethal precision. The submarine withdrew, the carrier continued, and the ocean returned to apparent calm. But both sides sailed away with new data, new respect, and a clearer understanding of how close silent contests at sea can come to something far more irreversible. In the days that followed the encounter, the absence of public acknowledgement did little to diminish its internal significance. Within naval circles, the episode was classified as a controlled but consequential interaction, one that revealed both strengths and vulnerabilities without escalating into open confrontation. Tactical assessments concluded that the carrier strike group retained the advantage. Detection had been achieved, contact had been maintained, and the submarine's maneuvering space had been constrained without the use of force. From a doctrinal standpoint, that outcome aligned precisely with modern anti-submarine warfare principles. Dominate the undersea battle space through awareness and positioning rather than destruction. However, analysts were careful not to frame the event as a one-sided success. The very fact that a diesel-electric submarine was able to approach within a tactically sensitive radius of one of the world's most advanced aircraft carriers carried weight. In classified debriefings, officers reportedly acknowledged that the submarine demonstrated disciplined acoustic management and a sophisticated understanding of local oceanographic conditions. A post-incident modeling review suggested that under slightly different thermal conditions, detection could have been delayed by several additional minutes, an eternity in submarine warfare timelines. That finding alone prompted recommendations for more frequent environmental data collection during patrols in stratified waters. Intelligence agencies also drew conclusions beyond the purely tactical. The submarine's patrol pattern, endurance, and willingness to operate assertively in international waters were interpreted as a strategic signal. It suggested a deliberate attempt to showcase capability rather than merely conduct routine training. Some defense observers later speculated that the encounter was intended for domestic political messaging within Venezuela, demonstrating resolve against a powerful naval presence in the region. While such interpretations remain speculative, regional analysts noted a brief surge in state media references to maritime sovereignty in the weeks after the event. On the American side, the aftermath produced subtle but measurable adjustments. Anti-submarine patrol frequencies in the broader Caribbean basin increased by a reported 18% over the following quarter, according to defense budget briefings. Maritime patrol aircraft rotations were quietly extended, and joint exercises with partner navies incorporated expanded undersea tracking drills. None of these changes were publicly tied to a specific incident, yet the timing was not lost on observers who monitored deployment cycles. Strategically, the encounter reinforced an evolving reality of naval competition.